We're live on Facebook.
I mean, YouTube.
I'm like, whoa, that was a change.
YouTube. You're all set. Go ahead.
Thanks,
okay,
Pam.
thank you very much. Well, this is a special meeting of the Planning Board in connection with comments and discussion of the form-based DGIS. This evening's conversation will be chiefly focused, I think, on the DGIS. And so bring the meeting to order. And I guess once again, I should announce that this meeting has been is being convened by video conference in compliance with Governor Cuomo's executive orders, which suspends certain provisions of the open meetings law to allow municipal boards to convene meetings via video conferencing without in-person attendance by the public. We will not be taking comments from the public during this meeting. It's just an internal discussion meeting, but it is, of course, an open meeting for viewing. In addition, the public has been provided with the ability to view, hear, and a transcript will be provided at a later date. There's a quorum of the board at this time, so the meeting has been called to order, and we'll take it from here. So welcome all, and here we go. We're dealing with this monstrously long document, which is makes for fascinating reading because it tends to be repetitive after a while. But I really especially enjoyed that one sentence that starts off by saying, "This is not a construction process; it's just the document that will lead to the process," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing it. But in any event, we're set tonight. How would board members like to proceed? Dick and I were just having a quick little informal discussion. Dick, I hope everyone got Dick's comments. He submitted some additional comments this afternoon. Tom had comments the other day. I sent comments in or questions in this afternoon. How would you like to proceed? Do you want to just go through the comments? Do you, I think that might be more useful, frankly, than trying to go through the document. I don't think we can possibly make it through the document if we go page by page. We just have to assume that we've all read it and looked at it and have our thoughts and comments at hand. Thoughts, comments on that procedure? Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense to go through the comments. And we had the original memo based on our discussion from last week, and then the comments either based off of the memo or just comments in general. So I think it makes sense to go through the comments. I think we're saying a lot of the same things that we said in the meeting and in the comments. And so the point is just to get to a place where we can share something from us to the town board that'll be constructive and helpful to guide this EIS process forward.
Right. And from my perspective, I really didn't get involved with the parking issues or the affordable housing issues, because I thought, Eldad, you handled talked about that at some length and with great insight last time, and Tom spoke about the parking. So there was nothing that I felt that I was going to add to that conversation. I thought you guys really hit those very well, and I think Tom's comments amplify some of those as well. So I just didn't see the need for doing that, so I just stayed clear of it. I thought you guys did a good job with that.
Can I thank you. Tom, I thought what you wrote was great. I don't have too much or much at all to edit or comment on it. I just have a couple points that I wanted to add that I thought weren't addressed that we talked about to some extent the last time we discussed this, and some that we didn't talk about that I could just throw into the mix, and then we could just go through the written comments that were shared. Is that okay?
Yeah, great. I think it's great. Thank you.
So one thing that we talked about at the last meeting that I don't think was in any of the comments circulated, but again, I may have missed it, so I apologize if I did, but that's the issue of traffic mitigation measures. We had talked about wanting to see more detailed analysis associated with the T and just specifics on the traffic mitigation measures. One, I'm not crazy. We talked about that. And two, I didn't miss it, right, in the comments?
No, it's not in anything that I tried to summarize everybody's comments, and I missed that. I didn't see it. Maybe it was in Alicia's. If so, I apologize. But you're right. We did talk about that, And
We did.
and I think that was something which was I think it was well said by you. And if we want to sort of recap any specific thoughts so that we can get them in written down in the next draft, that'd be great.
I think that's a good observation. And I think perhaps we were a little bit distracted by the conversation that we had about the T intersection. And, you know, it's listed as a mitigation in the I guess, in several areas, but I think traffic as well as parking and walkability, et cetera. And it's an important distraction because it, you know, if it ever were feasible, it frees up extra land. It makes the hamlet come together. It is, in my view, an issue that really separates the two land masses and really is very, very unfortunate. And no matter what we do going forward, if that triangle exists in its current form, it seems to me that it will still have this unfortunate impact on those issues.
So I think, I mean, the comment in general is to some further analysis associated with the specific traffic mitigation measures that were proposed, including feasibility associated with this T, right? Because that was part of our discussion. Could it be done? Initially, we thought it couldn't be done, but if it's proposed in here, either there's an answer that it still can't be done, and then it shouldn't be included in the document, or if it can be done, then that needs to be further explored.
Right.
Go ahead, Aldan.
No, I was going to move on if you want to.
Okay.
Well, I think before we do, I had one thought on that, and that, you know, I hit a couple of times. There are issues in the document alluding to this development of civic buildings down, or expansion of civic activities and civic buildings down at Town Hall. And I've been chomping at the bit on this, you know, in the committee as well. And that is, I'm not sure, it might be in there, but I'm not sure that we've even captured or discussed the numbers that might be coming in because of that activity. And I think anything that does not anticipate, you know, traffic issues, parking issues, et cetera, if that is part of the overall plan, it really shortchanges this plan.
I think it's a good point. It should be included.
I had assumed that because it was listed in the community center, I think was listed, the square footage was added into the square footage for that particular block, that the trip generation rates for that particular use would have been folded into the traffic analysis and the parking associated with it. I just assumed that was the case. I personally didn't dig deep into the traffic analysis to see if that was actually done that way.
Right. And that's why I asked the question. So I think we should have that information. And the other issue that I raised was, and I don't know if it is that important or not based on the current plan, but again, I've been raising this for months, and that is, if we are setting up what I think is the best way to set up a viable, healthy economic hamlet, we need visitors. And, you know, are we anticipating the traffic or, you know, visits from outside, people who live outside of the hamlet and even outside of the town? This was certainly one of the linchpins to the economic analysis that we were told a number of times, that to be successful, the hamlet needs to attract people from outside the hamlet, even outside of the town. So that's another issue. It may very well be in there, but that's why I asked the question.
I didn't see anything specifically listed as visitors. I think that the trip generation rates, I think, were just based on land use, and the parking ratios based on land use, without being specific about, you know, who those people actually are. And so I wouldn't know what to say about that, actually. I don't know if Sabrina has any thoughts on that.
Oh, I think you guys raised a great point. I think that we can incorporate it wanting to understand more about the traffic analysis and, does the analysis include the trip generation by visitors into the hamlet as well as the new residences? So, previously you had a discussion about a block by block analysis for parking structures and traffic.
Right.
So it's fair to say that the block regarding the community center and town hall properties would have that same kind of calculation.
So I think the uses though, right? Wouldn't they have analyzed the uses based upon the trip generation? And what you're asking for is whether it's possible, say if there's a proposed dining use, is there a way to calculate how much of that use comes from outside of the town or from different parts of the town? Because that might have an impact on traffic patterns. So you're looking at traffic distribution as well.
Right, but you also have to keep in mind, the traffic analysis examined peak hours and Saturday morning. So,
Right.
It's not as if, the dinner hour was captured.
Right.
So we have to be careful. We were looking at the point in time when there would be the most cars
Sure.
on the road.
So, yeah, that would be the worst case analysis. Is that right, Sabrina?
Correct, the peak hours.
Right.
Right. And
Yep.
so the assumption would be then that in the hours, I'm just making this up, but in the hours that the visitors would be coming would not be during that period. It would be during an off-peak period, and that number of cars would not exceed, right, the worst case, except that the origin and destinations of commuters going in and out of town and that are different from visitors coming in and out of town.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know if that factors in. I don't know. I mean, I don't think we're talking about, 500 visitors coming in for dinner on Saturday night. So I'm not sure to the extent that it really would be impactful, but I think it's a fair question to ask.
I think it's a great question to ask. I'm not sure, and see what the response is.
Right.
That is, the charge under the DGEIS is to look at the thresholds, the worst, the maximum impact areas. And so under traffic, it is the peak hours in the morning, the peak hours in the evening, and typically a Saturday morning. And so that traffic analysis is based on flow of cars in and out at that time.
Right.
For whatever use, you could be coming in for dinner at 5 o'clock.
Right.
But it doesn't really include a destination, if you would, like an ice skating rink, movie house. Nah, movie houses are dead.
There's no destination factored into the plan. The most of a destination is the community center.
Yeah, but the community center, the community center on, that's a small building, and it doesn't get a lot of use.
Yeah.
Right now. So how would it be jacked up, in a way to get more use, because it's underused, and maybe it even should be torn down and something bigger built there. But that might be an attraction then, and then you got a traffic issue, a parking issue there.
So unless I'm mistaken, the DGIS, its purpose is not to anticipate all possible futures,
Correct.
but to anticipate what would be the most likely worst case future with a specific, in this particular case, land use in mind, which is residential with some commercial.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
I think that's right, Tom. And if I can just add to that, the DGIS process envisions that if there is a use that comes in later that was not studied or needs to be studied further, that would be one of the, that would occur in the future as a supplemental DGI, a supplemental EIS specific just to that use. And language to that effect would be written into the finding statement to make it clear what are those thresholds and criteria where you would be doing a project-specific secret analysis that could not rely upon the DGIS.
Isn't it likely, Nick, that, to correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it likely that almost any future new development of any size would probably have to go through a supplemental EIS process to sort of drill down into the specifics or not?
No, I think this envisions that they would not be, and we'd have to see what those thresholds are. I don't think we're at that point yet. And that's a comment that can and should be made to make sure that the FGEIS and the finding statement are clear as to what is the criteria that would trigger a project-specific secret review that is not covered by the GEIS process.
Okay, so that's
I-
significant.
yeah, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead,
I'm
Bob.
sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead, Tom, please.
okay, so that may be significant in that with respect to this, essentially, especially the town-owned land, that it just does a departure from for instance, a departure from a land use, right? For instance, right now there's, and this really, I think, gets to the Dick's point. There's a whole bunch of residential in the town land. There's some commercial, and there commercial retail, and then there's the community center. If the town were at some point in the future decide that when it came time to actually develop that property, if big if and when, I don't want to put anything, to project any future that the town board wants to pursue. But if they were to come up with a development land use which they thought was better for the town, public policy wise, et cetera, that departed from those land uses and those specific land uses and those specific impacts that come from the land uses which are in the DGIS, would they have to do a supplemental?
Absolutely.
They would. So, for example, if it were decided, and I throw this out as an absurd example to make the point, that instead of residential on the town-owned property, you put in a movie theater of a massive size. That would have to be studied because the GEIS would not have envisioned or studied those potential impacts.
See,
So-
I respectfully disagree. And I think it's bad planning to do it in this kind of segmented fashion. It seems to me that one of the purposes of this generic EIS is to get generic information out there, and we have understanding because if the town has in mind something else in the future for the community center, for example. And I mention that because it's in the document as something that's being thought about. If we don't understand what the traffic patterns and issues are now, including on a generic basis, something out there that's going to be developed, we may find that ultimately that public initiative is going to be frustrated because of existing traffic issues and constraints. So I think to not look at this now in a generic form, not to sit there and say it's going to be a skating rink, it's going to be a movie house, but to say there's going to be a thing. The town thinks that there will be a thing here, and anticipating that there's going to be a thing that's going to attract people from outside of the hamlet coming in. And, generically, what is that impact? What can we expect on Saturday mornings if we have a community center with some sort of programs that for kids and adults or whatever it might be? What can we expect? And I think not to do that at this point is very much shortchanging this process. And I disagree strongly with this notion that is something you push off into the future as a supplemental. I think that's why this town has had so many difficulties, because we don't plan in that way. And we have this opportunity with this generic document to really look at this more globally for the hamlet. And I wasn't joking when I referred to in the very first beginning, my first comment was, how do we define community? Because I believe it's used a whole bunch of different ways in this document. I look at this hamlet as something that is a town asset, not a Chappaqua Hamlet asset, not just a living enclave and just for the people down here in the valley, but something that should be and could be of an attraction, a destination for people in the town. So when you look at it in that manner, I think we should be looking at it more broadly than just what was being proposed here, and to say, look, in addition to this, we know that we've heard this so many times. We know we have to do something here to create some sort of destination, some there. And I don't know what that is, but we should be looking at that now and just generically, these folks can put together some figures and say, look, that's likely to generate X, Y, Z. And it's probably going to be okay, but at least we should know about that.
Right. And what I was going to say about was I think there's little facets of two different discussions. One is, what if something is proposed that is not presently envisioned or would be a permitted use under the district, but would be a better fit, which is sort of what I understood Tom was going towards, at least one aspect of this question. That would clearly be a supplemental study, because that wasn't something that was envisioned. And what you're saying is part of the comprehensive plan, part of a form-based code, is to add some vitality and draw and attractiveness that is allowed for in the existing zoning code, and has that been sufficiently analyzed? And to that, you're saying that should not be deferred. That should be made sure that it's considered at this time.
Right. And even as alternatives to what the current proposal is, A, B, C, D.
So Nick, the reason I asked the question the way I did was because I happen to agree with Bob. The reason I asked the question the way I did, the ingoing presumption for the reason to do the DGIS was to create a what do you call it? A gateway that private landowners could walk through without having to go to the expense and time of doing their own EIS to promote development in the hamlet. And I think that that's a good thing. But carried along with it is the town-owned land. And in the very beginning of this process, when we started to talk about with the consultants in that little working group we had, which was good for a couple of months, I was concerned about this. I thought that the town-owned land shouldn't be included in the zoning, because it essentially, as I understand it from Nick, who I think just confirmed for me, that actually the town is bound by, in the DGEIS, is bound by the land uses which are specifically in the form-based code. And that, let me finish, and that if they want to depart from that, and for instance, put in a movie theater, this is Nick's, I think it's Nick's example, or if they wanted to put in a skating rink, or if they wanted to put in, some event venue, or, whatever, that they would have to go through a supplemental EIS process. And my feeling was that now that I understand that better, I think that confirms, the logic of not having them in this form-based code to begin with.
Well, I think that's true only if you have not identified, or I think the town board, or at least has proposed, or the form-based code includes proposed uses on the town-owned property as well as on private properties that are deemed to be suitable for exploration as to whether the town was to adopt that. The question becomes, are there different uses that should be proposed and studied as part of the form-based code? And that's where the discussion is. On one minor point, just because we're using terminology, the actual end product is the GEIS, the generic environmental impact statement. So it's not going to be the DGEIS that gets supplemented. It's the GEIS.
Right. Well, I understand that. I understand that. And I think
if I may, because I think you guys have been, different members of the board have been talking about this. And I think it's important for both Felicia and I to understand as we try and draft your memo. Is there agreement by this board that the town land should be extracted from this process?
Well, I think it's already in the document as an alternative. And I think one of the things I raised was it's only raised as an alternative with perhaps 5-story or 4-story. I think it should be, I think that's fine the way it's done. And I think that's good. But I think, Sabrina, going to your point, I think that's an excellent question because it brings us right to the point here. I think it should be explored with alternative uses other than residential. Now, in my memo, I mentioned something about commercial office, maybe a blend of office and residential in those spots. But frankly, I think more of a public type use would be of interest and should be explored, because I think the impacts are different, and I think it's appropriate in an EIS to look at those alternative impacts.
So, but Bob, I think gets back to earlier conversations that we've had, I think as a group, but it just occurs to me that there is really, as far as I can tell, there is no reason for the town land to be in here, because eventually, if the town decides that they are going to develop the property, they will have to sell the property. They will have to let an RFP in order to structure that deal to begin with, I think, and then sell the property. And by the specifics that are in and the EIS, the GEIS, they would be bound by, I think, the specifics in the form-based code with respect to land use that there's no reason for them to be bound by. I remember, do you remember when we went through I know you remember, we went through and Dick also, when we went through the Chapco Crossing thing. Not only did they rezone like in a flash, they also at the same time changed the comprehensive plan. And then the next day or in the next session, the town board changed did the rezoning. And the process by which that happened was a master plan. We call it the concept development plan, whatever it was, which was worked up so that the town had a real understanding of what it was going to be. So I guess that what I'm suggesting is that there really ought to be some sort of more master planning for the town land to really understand exactly what's the best use for that property. And it is not what is normally called in the real estate world, the highest and best use. It's not. There is another initiative here that the public is responsible for. So in order to go through that process, my suggestion is just pull it out and go for alternative C. And let the form-based code work for the private landowners, which was the original intent.
But that's a discussion on the form-based code.
I was going to say that I think we're morphing the discussions between the policy
Right.
versus commenting on the DG, and they
Right.
do overlap. I think what I'm hearing is what Bob was saying, and Tom, you're adding to it as well. There should there be another alternative? Whether you agree with the alternative isn't the question. The question is, does the document, the DGEIS, have sufficient information to analyze potential significant adverse environmental impacts? And are there, in your questions, are there additional scenarios that should be studied? The
Right.
policy question as to how the land should be zoned is best left to a discussion on the code.
Correct.
Right.
That's absolutely correct.
We launched right over into the next topic, and I understand
Yes.
that, but I think that there's this latent frustration about the whole subject, which probably that happens. So we should stick to the document right now.
Right, but I think Nick's summary at least addresses my concerns and what I would want to see in the EIS itself, and that is expanded alternatives for the public property, as well as later on I talk about commercial in terms of office.
Yeah,
I think we're missing the boat with just this residential.
I think that's right, but to that end, the word residential, if it's on what's now public property, I would feel much more comfortable with it being something that serves the public directly. And I don't know what that is,
Right.
but I don't mind, having it in the program or not in the program at this point. But, I would not be in favor of putting residential housing, over on the west side of Greeley, where it used to be a swamp, as far as I could tell, going way, way back, and it has crappy soils, and it's going to be piles. It's all going to be on piles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go in the parking lot area, and you'll see some places where the cars park. That where the wheels sit, there are holes. There are 4 holes. And they're about 6 inches deep, so it's already being condensed, the soil underneath. So I see an environmental issue there that's costly to operate there, and I don't really feel comfortable with putting a bunch of residential things there. I think it should be something that's more in the public service.
Okay, but going back to the traffic, just to kind of try to sum this up to help Felicia and Sabrina, so we can actually get a document out. Yeah, we agreed that on the traffic analysis, to Eldad's initial question and point, which was right on point, was we did not address that in our comments. We should address that in our comments, and we should our note to the town board should request an expansion of the traffic analysis, mitigation issues, exploration of this T intersection, and then exploration of, it's not unlike everything else. It's not unlike the affordable housing when we started talking about that last time, because as you start going through all the various disciplines and the issues under that, it starts impacting everything. So rather than wasting all that time on that issue, we know that a traffic analysis, if we look at other alternatives for use of public property or private property, it's going to have different impacts. So we, again, want to do it generically, it seems to me, and just say, look, the analysis needs to be expanded. Take a look at the alternative uses of the public property. Take a look to make sure that we're picking up visitors, make sure we're picking up, increased activity because of commercial, et cetera. And they may have already done this, but I think it's important for us to ask the question. And it seems to me, Nick, this is the time to ask those questions and make certain that those issues are covered.
That's right. And you want to make it as specific as possible, or to make sure that the additional areas you want examined are set forth, so you give the consultants that guidance and not the room to interpret what you want.
Right. Does that seem fair? I mean, again, a generic traffic analysis comment so that Felicia and Sabrina can try to put together a memo on that, that addresses that issue, which, we really didn't address specifically, I don't think, with our comments.
I have no problem with that. And I think that, I don't know how you get it into numbers, but it certainly, it is a use that could happen, and therefore it has to be evaluated.
Yep. Okay.
I would
Okay.
like to make an assumption that if the use is on the plan today, that it was factored in. I think it's healthy to ask the question and ask for it to further be delineated. And if it hasn't, then they have to factor it in. I think that ties nicely with your question regarding alternatives and alternative use of public lands. I feel I have a good understanding of what you're looking for. I'm sure Felicia is presenting all of this and is shaking her head yes as well. So we'll be in a good position to prepare a draft for you that includes that information.
Thank you.
Good. That sounds good. Okay.
What did you just say?
It's being recorded.
That's right.
Say that again.
All right.
Oh, the first thing.
We're gonna turn to Eldad now for the next point that we didn't explore.
Thanks, Eldad.
So, but that's good. I think we're all on the same page there. So that's
I
good.
think so. I think it was a good discussion. I think that's important.
The points about affordable housing were raised in your notes, Tom, but I just wanted a kind of a more generic, sorry if that word is being overused already, but a more generic sort of comment to the EIS to say that I would like to see an affordable, a section dedicated to affordable housing, period. That's not there. And I want to be very explicit to say that there should be a section dedicated to talking about analyzing, answering the questions that Tom raised in his comments, but there should be a section dedicated to affordable housing.
Mhm.
Sabrina and Nick, do we have flexibility in terms of, or does the town have flexibility in terms of how it goes about or how it defines affordable housing, workforce housing? Does the town have the ability to modulate, or do we have to follow the counties and states and federal guidelines and we have to follow those numbers and that's it?
We have the ability to, the county has recommendations. We have the ability to craft our own approach.
Okay,
That
very interesting.
approach
just-
needs to be guided by certain legal considerations because you can't
Right,
Yes.
right. I would
you
think so.
can't craft the language. Yeah, so there are some considerations, but you do not. You do have that. You do have some flexibility. Yes.
Right, and I want to give you an example of flexibility, if you will. In New Rochelle's form-based code, they offer incentives. If you go to 12%, you get a little bit more density. If you go to 12% affordable, they give you different density provisions if you're at 80% of AMI versus 60% AMI. White Plains ordinance for affordability also has a tiered system to try and instigate a mix of affordable. So you get the workforce and affordable, 80% and 50% of AMI. So, as I supported you at the last discussion that there is a missing discussion of affordable housing in the DGEIS right now. And that affordability really, in my opinion, has to be balanced with the economics that we're looking at, which is tied to height of buildings and so on, and parking and so on and so forth. So that discussion has to be fully vetted in the FEIS in order for us to be able to use that to make findings as to how best to amend the existing code to provide the housing diversity we are looking to provide here.
So do you remember, Sabrina, because I don't, to what level of specificity the comprehensive plan addressed these numbers? Did it at all?
It did not dive deeper. It just spoke of a diversity of housing, both housing type and for different income levels. It spoke to the need for workforce and affordable housing and workforce housing. So everything that the town and the planning board has been doing in regards to review of projects in our single family residential zones and our other overlay zones where we have the provision to require affordable housing. That is consistent with the comprehensive plan. What's new here is that our commercial zones don't require affordable housing as a provision. It was added into the code, but there's no analysis associated with it.
Okay, so the next question I have is, I know that the county ran around to all these towns and said, you aren't meeting our target. So I guess we do have the ability to craft our own, but
we're not going to reinvent the wheel.
Would it be prudent to sort of really pay attention to what the county's saying?
We do. We do. In fact, Norman Drummond spoke yesterday to the town board about the housing needs assessment. There is symmetry between what the town board is looking for in regards to affordability and what the county recommends.
Okay,
and so yeah, rest assured, this is something that I'm intimately involved in, and I do not see us fraying from what the county expects of our municipality. We have been very diligent in meeting housing needs.
So
yeah, one issue I would like to raise in this, and it might be something that's for the form-based code conversation rather than the EIS, although it has obviously social impact. And that is that I think that we should all insist on a design that is similar to what we did at Chappaqua Crossing, where workforce affordability market rates are all blended. They are invisible to people walking down the hallways. They're invisible to exterior folks. They all look the same. However, the differentiation is made by the builder, maybe with finished products, et cetera, as we saw in Chappaqua Crossing. That should be the standard, I think, the gold standard by which this town pursues any kind of affordability workforce housing.
I agree.
Boy, did we ever drop the ball at Station Road on that one.
Yep.
It's an embarrassment. Okay, that's
well,
fine.
and just to
That's a digression. I apologize.
It is, and that is what the zoning allowed.
Yep.
So, okay, Eldad, did you have anything else
On this?
on anything
On affordable housing, specifically, Eldad, is there anything that you would want to see, any sort of numbers? I mean, I'm not in a position. I think it's really a policy one in terms of, what AMI do we want to use? I mean, sometimes you use it too low, you disqualify workforce. You know, like it or not, it's expensive to live around here. So, you know, to have an unrealistically low AMI, I think is almost self-defeating. But
I just think that there needs to be a discussion, and like Sabrina pointed out, the idea that there might be options or a range or incentives, you know, and the impact on viability and height. I think that discussion is just sorely lacking in this document, and will allow
good.
the decision makers to make better informed decisions.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be eliminated just because it's a commercial district that most of this is in.
Correct. Okay. Do we have a good, Sabrina, do you have a good sense, and Felicia, do you have a good sense of what we've been talking about here in terms of some of the issues and hallmarks that we would like to make sure we address with the town board?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Eldad, next issue. He's the point person tonight.
For now. So there's another section that I was hoping to see in the EIS that actually I don't think we've discussed, that does not exist, and that is one of sustainability, sustainable building, climate change. And I guess my question is, does it belong in the document? You know, there's a few references in the document towards, you know, how in general this contributes towards sustainable practices and Westchester 2025, but there are two different issues when it comes to how this may impact, at least two different ways this may impact sustainability. One is in general having density and creating more you know, foot traffic as opposed to car traffic. But then there's the construction of the buildings themselves and what make that look like. And I have to plead ignorance. I don't know what our code says, if there's any requirements associated with, you know, green sustainable construction.
So that falls within the town's green building code. We have a green building code, which is currently under discussion to be updated in accordance with the New York State stretch code. As part of the development of the form-based code, it was determined that whatever happens in the green building code would apply to buildings in the form-based district. You know, it's through the building permit process. So that is why there's no elaborate call for passive homes or, you know, other technologies to be employed, because we really have a very advanced green building code, which we're currently looking at right now to update.
And okay, that's helpful. And you think that the timing of that will be in place sufficient?
That is in place now. So whatever we do there is required within this district.
Okay.
We require that of all developments. You know, they have to be, you know, certified to a certain standard.
So it's part of the building code.
As part of the building code, correct.
Got it. Thank you.
So that was one step into construction, that the form-based code is zoning. After zoning comes the buildings. When they come in, all applicants that come in under this code for a building permit will be required to show or demonstrate their consistency with our green building standards.
Great. So that satisfies my concern.
Okay.
Okay, so I have another question that may not necessarily impact, maybe a comment on the EIS, but you know, I've attended many, if not all, of the public hearings and the engagement sessions, and I've listened to them. And an issue that comes up all the time has to do with the idea that we're doing, that, you know, that the town is doing this during a pandemic. And I would love to think that it'll be a non-issue by the time this gets passed, but and I'm just curious if there's any precedent in the environmental, you know, review community and in the environmental law world to dealing with such an issue while there's something like this happening, or how are other EISs handling this right now? if anybody knows.
Well, I would leave other EISs to Nick. I will tell you in my realm, as a planner, we are not planning for COVID. It is a point in time. We have full expectation that as time goes on, we will see the results of this. We know that the suburban office market is booming as opposed to where prior to COVID. We know that there's a lot more vacancy in city centers in relation to office space. Our train station parking lot is not at the capacity that it usually is at this time of year. And there's been discussions about trying to sell parking permits to more parking permits to non-residents because of the vacancy. We're going through transition right now, and the biggest impact in this area for that transition is parking in the train station. And
Okay,
we already know that parking on that property is not its highest and best use.
Right,
Right.
that's a given. We know that. And I alluded to that in some of my questions, and it seems to me, to Eldad's point, I don't know what we do with this, and I'm not suggesting that you plan for COVID, whatever that means. But I think there's information and lessons that are becoming clearer and that might change patterns in terms of transportation, use of the trains. When you say that the parking lot's underutilized, it's empty. That big lot I drive past it every single day. There's one guy parks a Suburban out in the middle of nowhere every single day. He's the only guy, and everything else is empty. There's not a car in the place.
Unless
So
parents are using it for their kids to ride bikes.
exactly.
Right.
So the issue, it seems to me, one of the problems that we've had with this whole EIS is one of the issues is parking. And I just wonder if this change in pattern, if we can anticipate that there's going to be some sort of permanence. I just think that people who are currently working from home at this point have come to the realization that I am no longer spending 3 hours of my life every single day on the train commuting. And I can be just as effective here, and I'm not missing my kid's ball game. I'm not missing my kid's recital, and I don't have to rush to the train. I have a life. And it seems to me that this has been a lesson, and with the increased bandwidth that we're seeing in the expansion of the internet, I think there's going to be, I suspect, this is purely anecdotal, of course, but I wonder if we can somehow take that, because it seems to me parking is such a constraint, and if this parking lot is not going to have to be used to this degree, do we start talking about something other than a parking garage or et cetera?
Let me throw this at you, and Nick, feel free to jump in. But we're required under seeker to look at the maximum impact, right? And so right now we're seeing less of an impact when it comes to parking and traffic than we do than we have studied, right? We studied peak, pre-COVID. So again, this is an environmental analysis. We're not planning for, a new future for the parking lot because there's no cars there. We're looking at rezoning. So if there is a future of a vacant parking lot that's no longer being used as a parking lot, the transition to a higher use is studied to a certain point under new zoning, then it may need to be rezoned even further. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We just don't have that crystal ball.
Yeah, we're not in the prediction business. It's just not something we can really do with any confidence. And the only real references I think that we can really tie anything to are the historical ones, and in which case you use the metrics that have worked in the past, and in the future when it's time to develop the property, those people responsible for that particular investment on the public sector side and on the financial private sector side are going to be looking at what you're talking about, Bob, very, very carefully when it's time to put skin in the game. And so
but market forces will drive it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really believe that the zoning is really just sort of a blanket boundaries. And as you go forward, things are going to self-correct over time because they,
Right. Okay.
they do.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that if you develop the downtown with the 3 or the 4-story buildings and you have all these cars, that if it really looks like the existing situation with no cars in the parking lot, or let's say maybe it comes back at 50%. Okay, one option was mentioned, oh, let's sell more tickets to other people. The other option is, well, why build the parking, with the building, have them park across the street in the lot.
Right, and there is provisions within the parking toolbox to consider that, because, there is realization that there's opportunities that we're not taking advantage of right now.
Right.
Anything else, Eldad?
God. A lot of pressure here. I'm sorry, Eldad.
No, I like it. I like
You're
the,
doing really well under the pressure, let me tell you.
thank you. I'm looking at my notes here. Nope. I'm good.
All the time?
Okay.
All the time.
I'm happy with where we stand and look forward to what you guys work up out of this conversation and all the material you have.
Okay.
But no, I'm good with this. I think that I think our reviews has been really substantive and thorough, and I know you guys will be very careful in your writing of this to be sure that the tone is correct and respectful.
Of course.
I still have, I get these echoes in my head of Les saying no Sherman-esque statements. And so I'm grateful that somebody else is writing this thing just to keep us out of hot water.
So we can take the comments and things that we've received from Dick and Bob, the discussion here tonight, revise the draft that we circulated to you, and give you another draft.
Yep. Did everyone
Okay.
see Dick's comments? Did you circulate those to everyone, Dick? Your comments this afternoon?
My comments on the form zoning? No, I just sent them to you.
Oh, do you want to talk about it? You had a couple of additional issues. I think some of these are form-based, right?
Yeah, that's what, mainly it's form-based.
Yeah, okay.
It's from the form-based document. So I don't know if you want to start tackling that or not, but I do have a typo on page 2 of the original document for the DGIS.
There's a lot of them in there, Dick.
Oh, okay, then I won't worry.
But no, by all means, please, Dick, if you could send your comments to Felicia, she'll be sure that everybody gets them so that we're
I
all-
did, and I asked her to send them to everybody.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
then the ones that you had sent me on 11/3.
Yes,
Oh, then we got them.
Yeah, I did circulate those.
Yeah, we got those.
yeah.
But Bob, were you talking about something else from today?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dick
I
sent,
had
comments
some
for
comments
today.
about the form-based zoning.
Right.
Okay, I
Well-
haven't seen those changes.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
fine.
actually, your first comment, for example, Dick, is about the wetlands again, and that's not real, that's EIS material. It's not really form-based. The comments that, that you raised on specific issues and specific pages.
Yeah. I have to, I didn't make a copy. I just sent it. So if you have a copy,
Get that?
that's very helpful. Thank you.
There it is.
Can somebody forward that to Felicia and myself?
Yes, it
Yeah.
went to Felicia.
I can forward it.
I
I'll
didn't
forward it
see
to
that.
everyone.
Not today. Not
No.
today. There was no attachment to your email today, Dick. You just said
Yeah.
you had comments on the first page and then nothing was attached.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't get anything.
Oh, okay. Well, fortunately, Bob did.
Yes.
Yeah, there's inconsistencies, and I have just a general sense that there's a lack of due process for the people that abut properties that are going to be developed, and that's a lack of due process compared to the due process that they get now. And I don't think that you know, for instance, the 30 days to review a sketch is really going to be that useful. And instead of having the planning board to help fight it, to debate these issues with the applicant, you know, it's going to be up to you know, the town staff to do it. And in some cases, you know, some of the problems here and there will be quite serious. And another one is the, you know, where you get to the point where you're going to issue a permit, and then if there are aberrations, you know, encroachments and everything else, you know, that'll be decided potentially, you know, by the building inspector. Whereas we do that now in the planning board. And so that's that kind of stuff that just sort of, you know, bothered me through the whole thing. But you can, when you get it, you can see the comments, and there's an opportunity to, you know, make changes if deemed appropriate.
Yeah, I just sent it out to everyone on personal emails. So Dick, you might have it on your AOL right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have to probably black you guys out to see it.
But those are, I mean, obviously legitimate points, but those are about the code.
Yes.
Right.
And we're going to be talking about that another time. Is that right?
Right. That's correct. That's
This
correct.
is just the start of it. And
Yep.
as Bob said, some of these comments they inject into, you know, the what we're doing here, but you have to, I didn't write them up that way so that you could see it easily.
Hey, Bob,
Yes, yes.
I thought that we were going to this evening roll over into a conversation of the code
Yeah.
if we had time.
If we have time and if you feel comfortable with it, have we exhausted everything on EIS at this point? I think we've raised the kinds of issues, and I guess Felicia and Sabrina and I will try to work together to put together something that you guys will be comfortable with. Obviously, we'll get it back to all members of the board to make sure that you're comfortable with it and it captures what we discussed to your thinking, and making sure that we haven't missed things, like, for example, like traffic. For example, like we missed somewhat until this discussion this evening.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll
So
include Nick's point in the email that said just kind of what it is that we're doing, that we're not saying that this is defective but more
Right.
just guiding the document.
Yeah, that last paragraph that he edited in what I wrote, I agree.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we're not.
Wait, I'm sorry, Tom, you agreed with something I wrote?
Completeness again.
Oh, Nick, you weren't supposed to hear that.
He thought you were offline, Nick.
And it's recorded. This is even better.
Oh, no. Now I have to send him my resignation.
Yeah. Well, you know, it may be recorded, but I don't see a date stamp like you do with things on TV. I mean, it could have never happened, maybe, or it's old. But enjoy it while you can, Nick.
Yeah, I think, Eldad, to your point, that could be sort of our preamble in terms of what we're talking about, what we're doing here with this document, and the role that we're playing as an interested agency in commenting to the town board, who is the lead agent. Okay, good. You want to talk a little bit or some about the form-based code itself?
Well, I'd like to just follow up on what Dick said, because it just came, right out of the text for me, and it's actually, I actually noted the page and section. It's on page 11. It's on the approval process, and it's B2, and it says where section so and so and so and so in the current code authorizes an approval by the planning board of a site development plan for a reduction of a nonconformity, which I guess means mitigation. That approval shall be granted, said by the development department as a plan approval under. And so I think, getting to Dick's point, we talked about this before, the process of going to the development department, unless I'm mistaken, Sabrina, is not a public meeting where the public has the opportunity to raise comments and make suggestions in a public forum, but is rather either in writing or in coming into the town hall and talking to the development department about it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so that gets to, I think, Dick's point about, the public forum of people being able to be able to sort of raise their complaints and get a broader hearing rather than just a strictly sort of staff administrative one. It's a broader process. We talked about this before, and unless I'm mistaken, Bob, I thought you had some thoughts about that too.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about it, and some of my comments, not in the proper order, but they're all over the place because that's why I went through the document. But right from the get-go during the committee, I had problems and issues with this notion of the process, and it does not have to be connected in this fashion. I think that one of the questions I was asking, and I think one of the reasons we're going through this whole EIS to come up with a GEIS for applicants and developers is for those of us who have been through this process a lot, and I think everyone has been, whether on whatever side of the table. Developing the EIS is the time-consuming and the really expensive part of any application. So the town's taking this on and having this GEIS available for developers really is a tremendous economic and time-saving benefit, it seems to me, to applicants.
Absolutely.
And I salute it. I think it's a great notion. I think this is a wonderful incentive to get things going. But the notion that after that, in addition, granted that we meet the form-based code, after that basically is as of right and it's just administrative. I don't think that's something that works well in a town situation, our town especially. And it's not that I'm looking for additional work. I don't need it. We don't all need it. But I think I've always placed a great deal of importance on public input. And I've learned an awful lot during our public hearings. There's very often very, very good, creative, intelligent, insightful comments, which I think has not only just informed the board, but I think these comments have actually informed applicants. And I think the applications have been better for it through that process. Now, the EIS, again, is the long thing. The public hearing stage, once you have the EIS done, you're looking at the application. It seems to me, I don't know what the actual study is. There are a couple of applications, of course, we're not going to use as an example because it's not a good example no matter what. But, it seems to me that if you've got your EIS done, the balance of it is really just listening and making sure that you comply with code and comply with comments from board members, whether it's the zoning board, the ARB. I think Dick raised a very important issue. All this is form-based coding, yet the ARB is kind of cut out of this, and this is really their forte rather than just leaving it to the building inspector as proposed.
Well, the
So I
building,
think
if I may, they're
Sure.
not cut out. As part of the building permit process, projects go to ARB.
Okay.
All right,
Well-
that's a very important distinction, okay? Because the ARB actually reviews all building permits for the most
Okay.
part. Anything that involves exterior changes, new construction or signage.
Okay.
So
But-
their approval and there's a dollar amount which is
That triggers it?
reasonable, that
Mhm.
or
It's 5,000.
and it is a referral from the building inspector. I can tell you there are very few applications that do not go to ARB.
Well, the
Now, is
the
that-
wording
is that-
that's in the document now suggests there's another route. So that's not clear. And it wouldn't be clear to an applicant that that's where he has to go to, because there's a lot about, okay, we're going to have the environmental coordinator do all this. We're going to take, just have the planning board do very steep slopes and that. So there's a lot of things that are spelled out in changes of responsibility, but the ARB isn't included in any of the discussions. And there are discussions, about the building department, the planning group, looking at everything, deciding whether it looks nice on the outside. Didn't mention the ARB. So.
Well, we can look at that, but I think in general, the notion that the public will be restricted to a very limited administrative hearing, 30 days, whatever it might be, and putting the emphasis on a prescribed time frame. I don't know what the public value is to that. I know what the public value is in terms of development for expediting the EIS process and having that available for people. But I am one who suggests that based on my legal background, you cannot anticipate everything with your code. You're going to have issues. You're going to have pushback. We just can't anticipate everything. And this is real estate. Every single parcel is different. So there might be something that comes up from an adjacent owner that is a real concern and has to be looked at. And I think people need to have the confidence, whether it's just PR or not, that their voice is heard, that there's a public forum. I would be very much against moving so much of this internally administratively.
I don't mind
That's
it
a
being,
policy issue, obviously.
Well,
Yeah,
no, these are your comments, and listen, we're listening.
So,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Tom.
No, go ahead.
I just want to point one thing out. In the code itself, I'm on, how do I tell you where I am?
page 62.
Well, looks like page 7, maybe.
You didn't? Oh, no.
Got
Building permit. It just says within the form-based district, there shall be no requirement for architectural review board approval of a building permit.
There you go.
But then it says under 6550E through 6550I. I just want to, maybe that nullifies this. I just want to make sure that we are all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, that page 7 reference does not go into the building. It should not go, and I will check it, go into the building permit process.
So what's the answer here? Does the ARB see everything or not?
I was under the assumption that ARB sees everything.
Okay.
Well,
So
more
we should
importantly,
get
shouldn't see
confirmation on
everything.
that.
Yeah. it's
No,
gotta
exactly. There obviously needs to be clarification in the code as to how
Right.
that works.
Right.
So that would be good to sort of figure out and see what it actually says and what the intent is. But getting back to Bob's point, I think about the planning board in particular, I think this comment goes to, I think, to all the boards, but since it's the planning board that we are on, I don't think that it's a jealousy of authority or anything that we're concerned about. I understand the point of a form-based code, and which is to set the rules that everybody has to live by. And developers love that because it eliminates, first of all, a lot of unknowns for them, because the people sitting across the table have already agreed to this. And a lot of developers, actually, they don't care, what you tell them, essentially, as long as they get the return on investment. They just want to know what it is so they can get on with it. And I understand that, and I appreciate that, even to the extent of, how many, windows you're going to have and whether it's going to have shutters or not. They actually don't care about that either. Just let me build the thing, right? But so I understand that. And in that sense, a form-based code is a very developer-friendly code.
Yes.
And it just is. And I know about, the Transect, and I know about, CNU and Duaney, and they actually gave me one of their big awards one year. But I think that it goes too far in that sense, especially if it specifically cuts out a legitimate venue for the public to stand up and say, wait a minute. I know that we agreed that this was going to be the overall rules that everybody's going to play with, but in this particular case, it does not, it affects me and it affects our neighborhood. And in this way, we need to have an opportunity to say something about it. And I think that the public sector is not standing up strongly enough for public interest in that regard, because we're cut out of the process.
So I am going to disagree a little bit. I you
You
know,
can disagree a whole lot. You don't have to be so polite all the time.
thanks, Dave. I agree that certainty is very much desirable for developers. And I completely agree, Tom, that frankly, they don't care what you tell them to do. They just want to know what to do so they can get to the end result. Which is why I think that the idea of putting forward a form-based code that is, defines the parameters as we want them, and then allows the private sector to do what the private sector does. I think it's a good thing because we have an end result here, a goal. The point of doing the rezoning is to spur development, right? And so it seems to me that either we want development to happen, I get it that you want to, you don't want to cut the public out, and what we do serves the public and allows public input, and it's important, and it's very important. I'm happy to be on this board and happy to serve, and I think it provides valuable input. But there is an overarching goal here, and I think by putting this form-based code in place and then throwing up new roadblocks, it sort of is counterintuitive to the point. And I would argue that if there's something in the code that you or we don't like, then we can talk about those specific things so that we put kind of the bumpers in the place that we want it to go, so that we can guide development in the direction that we want. But I love the idea that we are creating sort of an as of right district to encourage and allow for the development of the kind and the sort that we want to see.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, so don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm agreeing that the form-based code is the right thing to do. I'm not disagreeing about that. I'm for it. I'm just raising one of the bumpers we need, I believe. And I think that in earlier comments, when we saw the first draft of the form-based code and the planning board sent comments in on that, we had asked for, in one of the 3 steps of the process, and I think it was the concept design or the schematic design. I think it was probably the concept design, because that's the most important, I think, step, where things at the level of that the planning board would normally be involved in, those things would start to take shape in the concept level, that we would, that the applicant would have to come before the planning board for, and I think what we talked about, and we need to talk about this now, whether it's right or not, but not as a formal application approval, right? But as a working session venue in the concept phase for the applicant to come in and to present in public what the concept plan is for that piece of property, for discussion and recommendation of the planning board, that then goes to the planning department, the development department, in their review. And I think that that's as far as that's what we sort of came up with as a response to the draft. And I don't think that that's an onerous thing. It would be an opportunity for the public also to be able to get together and talk about this in public with the town, on the in a public venue, just to sort of give guidance. And I don't see that as being a process, as something that puts any kind of a barrier to the flow of the work. It's essentially just one meeting and one presentation.
Well, and it's, to me, it's more fairness that way than what's written. Because I don't see what you just said in the document.
What's not there?
No.
No.
That's why I don't see it, I guess.
One of the other issues was, and I can't cite the specific section, but there was a section in the code that proposed that if there were some variation from the as of right, even that would not go to a ZBA, an ARB, ERB, or planning board. Instead, that would be determined internally by the development office. And I think that is a glaring problem, only because it's just bad optics. I think those kinds of things where there's going to be any kind of deviation from what we've all agreed is the form-based code, and they're going to be. Again, to my point, you can't possibly
I don't,
encapsulize everything. So
Bob,
I think there was a
Bob, I want a specific reference of that, because my recollection is that anything that deviates from the form-based code goes to the appropriate board that would otherwise handle that.
No, there was definitely a section that definitely referred it, and that's why I raised the issue. What are the standards that are going to be used for that kind of appeal review? So I'll have to find it, but it was definitely something in there, and that really was a concern to me. Again, I just don't know. I understand that to expedite this and make it move smoothly, but let's not forget, this is our community. It is our neighborhood. It is our town. It's our hamlet. It's not that we're just putting a building on a piece of land here. It has impacts to all of us. And whether we're future people, people who are here now, et cetera, I think it's important to have that forum. And I just think that this town in particular is very, very jealous, and I think rightfully so, of its ability to come together and have discussions, intelligent discussions, public hearings on matters of importance. Now, it may not be of great importance where the dumpster is on a particular plot, and I understand that, and there probably will be rules on that. But by God, if that we have the form-based code and it says that's where we're going to put the dumpster, and the landowner in some transition piece of property is sitting there saying, you're putting the dumpster there, and by the way, you're using this now as a medical facility, and so you're putting medical waste in this dumpster out here, I have a problem with this. So these are the kinds of things that could come up, and I just think to foreclose the ability of the public to have the right to examine these things in the sunshine of the day and open meetings is important.
So there's a reason, first of all, there's a reason why the state of New York, I think, unless I'm wrong, mandates that this town has to have a planning board and has to have a zoning board. I mean, there's a reason for that. And that's so that the public interest can be represented in the development of the town. And it seems to me that the planning board has to have it. I don't know what the state mandates it, Nick. I don't know why we have 5. Does the town decide whether it's going to be 5 or 7 or 3? But it's more than one. It's more than one person. And so,
Yeah, so actually,
go ahead.
Sorry, Tom. So yes, it can be either a 5 or 7 member board, but actually there's a requirement to have a zoning board of appeals. There's not a requirement to have a planning board. They're authorized to have it, but they don't have to create it, because some municipalities will keep it with the legislative authority.
Okay, see, that's why
that explains our low pay.
I hope set my bounds. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here with respect to there's a reason why there on these boards there's more than one person. It's because the issues are more complicated than one person should be trusted to make the decision for. And you get 5 of us together, 4 of us together, 3 of us together. Each one of us have and not just this board, zoning board, et cetera. Each person has a point of view, and
or 2 or 3.
Right. That actually renders a judgment that would be less wise if there was only one person involved.
Absolutely.
That's the fault, not the fault, but that's a concern that I have with the development department person being the person who is making, it appears to be, most of the judgments here. And that person actually decides whether something has gone overboard and needs to go to the planning board, right? I mean, we serve at the pleasure of, the planning board serves at the pleasure of the development department in that case. And so there's some concern, and this is my concern about it. And again, it doesn't have to be punitive to the development process. I'm just suggesting there be one meeting which is the results of which are not binding, but are suggestions about what could be done and should be done.
So if what you're suggesting, Tom, is us making a comment that there needs to be an automatic referral to the planning board for an advisory meeting that is not binding. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I wouldn't suggest it, but I won't oppose it either.
Well, I personally don't think that goes far enough. So I don't think it should be just advisory and non-binding. I think it should be something that is at some point in the process, there should be some sort of public hearing before the final imprimatur is given to the project.
Well, public hearing, I agree to. The question I think that is raised here is whether we have a review authority that either thumbs up or thumbs down, like we do in applications. And I'm suggesting that I'm not sure that that's necessary. Once you do that, you need more than one meeting, right? You're going to end up in a series of meetings because these people are going to have to come back over and over again the way they do now.
I think you could go directly to a public hearing, and once you have all this informal stuff done, whether a planning board participates at it or not. But it just seems to me at some point there needs to be a little bit of formality here. Not a little, a lot of formality here. I think there should be something that's consistent with the open law meeting law. I think it should be elevated to that level, whether it's the ZBA or the ERB, ARB, or the planning board or the town board. By the way, the town board is going to have probably some jurisdiction on some of these issues. And I just think no matter what, whatever the board is that's got jurisdiction on the issue, I don't see a pressing need, and I don't see a particular benefit other than to save a developer 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks at most. In the grand scheme of things, given the EIS, I think it's almost petty compared to the potential cost in optics and in process by not having a public hearing on every single one.
I think we're saying the same thing.
I
thought you were saying that the planning board, in this particular case, talking about the planning board would have the authority to deny the project and make the person come back, as opposed to instead advise, right, in a public hearing with the public there, right, advise the planning department how to proceed.
Okay, I'm not, they'd have to really think about that. I'm not quite sure what the difference is.
I'm going to back that out and say the development department, this isn't just written, for the planning department to take responsibility.
Fine. So
yeah, there's certain things that we should have responsibility over.
The difference is that we would have the authority to stop the project, Bob, or not stop the project.
Yeah, that has to be debated more, I think. I can see it either way at the moment, but just to help Sabrina, page 9 talks about the, there's discretionary planning board review on steep slopes. All right, but if you go back to page, where the hell is it? An earlier page, and that would be page 4, it says that all applications for construction or et cetera, shall comply with Chapter 137 wetlands, except that the approving authority shall be the Newcastle environmental coordinator. Then it goes on to Chapter 108, steep slope protection, except for very steep slopes, will be done by the somebody else, but it sends the steep slope stuff to the planning board, and then later it says it's discretionary. I don't know who gets to be the discretionary person, but very steep slopes can be very dangerous and they can have a problem. So I can see that that's an extra normal kind of situation, particularly when you're talking about building on the side of hills. And so there's probably a few other things like that that get to the point where they should be mandatory. But then in general, it should be a situation where once that's dealt with, then it becomes advisory or whatever. So the question is, well, all right, is it 3 things or is it 10 things? Or 2 things? And then I'm finished talking.
So the general question that we're discussing here is there a role for the planning board in the development of properties within the form-based district?
Yes.
Right now, as written, there is not. Is that fair to say?
No, I disagree. There's, at least for very steep slopes, it's
There's
there.
there's limited
Very
involvement
limited.
by the planning board under environmental situations.
Right. What we're debating now is whether there should be a role, that role should be put back in, and if so, should it be advisory or binding?
Yes.
And what I am willing to say is that I'm comfortable supporting the recommendation that there be a planning board role on all applications, so long as it be advisory at most. If the recommendation is binding, I cannot support that. I think that undercuts one of the sort of foundational pillars of this code, which is an as-of-right approach to a zoning district. And to me, it is one of the benefits, and it is not just a benefit to developers. It's a benefit to the community also, to have a clear understanding of what can be done here and an understanding of timing also. And so I would not support a comment that the planning board's role become binding here. But advisory, I can get behind.
I agree with that, Eldad. I understand the concept of as a right, and every single code has embedded in it as a right development. So there's nothing special about this code that says that people have as a right development where they otherwise they don't have as a right development in the existing code. It's the extent to which controls are put on that as of right development, as I understand it, in the form-based code, which should make the town a little bit more comfortable with the as of right designation, because it's already stipulated what that's going to, how that building's going to turn out, what it's going to be like. But to Bob's point, I've worked with developers all my life, all over the place, and I just know what they do, and I know why they do it, and I respect them for that, and that's what they do. And they're going to be, over and over again, I think there are going to be challenges to that, and there are going to be neighbors who are going to be upset. There are going to be neighbors who have no idea what's going on right now and in the future. What the heck just happened to me, right? And so under those circumstances, I agree. I like the idea of a non-binding review authority in one public meeting, which is done the way public meetings always are, where the developer makes his proposal and reviews it. And we give the planning board gives its recommendations to the process, and then that's
well, I would still say it should be a binding decision, with the understanding that when you have a form-based code with all this is a higher level as of right than the stuff we hear from all the attorneys who come in and say, I can put this house here. Well, you really can't put your house here unless you get approval. Here, it's just the opposite. So it seems to be, and Nick, I'll lean on you on this one. It seems to be that when you have this kind of code, whatever the role is for the planning board, it's going to be one of basically tweaking and steering. And I think not to have the ability to actually have a say in terms of the decision undercuts that ability to steer and tweak. But by the same token, I think any planning board would be out of its mind to think it could turn down an application that comports with the application. It's not going to stand up to legal challenge. It would be a joke. So I think we're getting a little bit worked up on that, because I don't think that there's ever going to be an attorney working for the planning board who's going to sit there and say, yeah, that's a good idea. Turn this down because you don't like the color or whatever it is, or Mr. Jones doesn't like the way the tree is put up here. That's just not going to happen. It cannot happen. So I think we're getting a little bit over our skis on this one, and withholding. And I just don't see the point of having a public hearing that we're just all just sitting around listening to these folks and saying, "Would you mind doing this?" If in fact we decide this is something where you've pushed it a little bit too far, you've actually gone outside. It's a matter of interpretation, and we'd like you to steer back inside within the walls, whatever the parameters might be. We all know what developers do. They will try to use the code to its advantage where they can, and there are going to be times of interpretation. And I think it's important to have the ability to interpret that and steer it with not just an advisory opinion, but one that says, no, that's not going to work. You have to do something else here. Not to turn it down, because it's just no way we're going to be able to turn it down. I'm not sure what the ZBA's rule is in here. I forget.
Your battery's gone.
Oh, it is? Okay, I'll recharge. And anyway, just those thoughts. So I would really be, not because I'm looking for the additional work, but I think it's really important to have teeth in addition to gums, maybe not teeth, in terms of steering the process and making sure that where people are starting to push out, we're able to push it back into the compliance. Sorry.
So Bob, I'll just make one last comment on this, and then I'll be quiet. I don't think we should lose sight of one of the, I think, most important reasons to have this venue is not just so that the planning board can offer comments or take have a more authoritative review of the project, but it's also to let the public show up at town hall and be able, rather than these conversations between the public and the project happen in either by mail or email or meetings in the development department's offices. It's to have the public venue for them to come in and also for us to give our opinions on this. I think sooner or later, it's not inappropriate to rely on the good faith of staff, of the leader of the development department to say, okay, I've heard from the public, I've heard from the planning board, and I'm going to do my very best to be sure this turns out right. And I think that sooner or later that maybe that's, you just have to accept in good faith that they're going to do the right thing and let the project go on from that point.
Sure, but I don't think that's any different from what we do now. I mean, we rely on Sabrina's opinion on zoning setbacks and applications, and Bob on water, et cetera, drainage. So, I mean, we defer to staff all the time and rely on their expertise, their good faith, their professionalism. We see it all the time. Well, so we do rely on it, but at the same token, if we get a situation where a member of the staff is saying, I've asked for this, I'm not getting this, or this is not what I want. And we've had those discussions. We've had professionals who argue back and forth. I don't like that interpretation. Someone's got to rule on that. And it seems to me that doing that in the public forum is the way to do it with a public board. I don't want to just tie it down with the planning board. It sounds like I'm just trying to protect the planning board. It's not. It's
no, I know you're not.
The zoning board. So it's all three. Each has a town board. Each has an incredibly important role in the current process. And I don't buy that there is a benefit to eliminating that public process and decision making.
I think Tom is saying, I think he's saying we should have the public, and I think we should have the public, and it gets to a point where instead of approving something, we would be perhaps saying this is acceptable, which is different than an approval.
Right. So
or another word that makes a nuance.
I think that what I'm suggesting actually in this one meeting is fundamentally different from the process we go through now.
Yeah,
the process we go through now, because it's binding, right? We make recommendations to the applicant. The applicant goes and works with the development department and brings back revisions, and then we look at that, and then we send them back again, and then they come back again, And, you know, it's got to be very frustrating because, I mean, I feel badly sometimes because they come before us and they just want a yes or a no. And instead they'll get 2 yeses, 1 no, and 2 maybes. And then they gotta come back again, and all of a sudden the yeses and the maybes have switched. And it's all done in good faith, right? We are doing the best we can. But that is that's the very nature of the process that I think people complain about. And so I agree with Eldad that it's a fundamental precept of this form-based code to sort of get past that. And I would say actually to get around it. And that part of it I don't like. And that's why I'm suggesting that we have a voice in the process. And I'm trusting that our voice will be honored and that leave it to the development department to, in hearing us and the public, make the right decisions.
I think that if we voice our opinions and in a public meeting, and the public gets to ask questions about the project and everything else, that would be highly productive. And I have total confidence in the planning department or the development department going forward and making it as more reasonable, shall we say, or fixing holes in what our the developer is providing that are easy to fix. So I guess I'm getting to the point where I'm okay with it, but I think that there are still some points that we would have to offer an approval as opposed to an acceptance, but they aren't many. There'd only be a few.
Well, this is a big subject that maybe we can revisit next time after we all have a chance to think about it.
I do have a question though. Sabrina, maybe this is for you. Today, if I want to build a building in Newcastle, and I own a single piece of land and I build according to the code, for the most part, I'm not coming before the planning board.
Depends where you are and what kind of building you want to.
Right, but I'm not inherently going for the planning board.
No.
And I just want to make sure that are we asking that no matter what, any proposal in the form-based district comes before the planning board for this advisory or binding vote, or are we asking that anything that would have triggered a planning board meeting prior to this still triggers that same planning board review? Does my question make sense?
We are changing the way projects are interpreted through the code. Right now it's a use base. Is your use consistent with the code? The code is very clear. If you're changing the previous use, you need to go before the planning board. It's called a change of use. So you'd have to specify, projects over a certain size or in a certain location. You'd have to tie your review. If you're looking to threshold certain projects, you'd have to create those thresholds or suggest that threshold. If a project contained more than 6 dwelling units or 6 apartments, does it get bumped up to the planning board? That type of thing.
Right. Okay. So maybe we can think about that also, but I turn the question to my fellow planning board members to think about that as well. Is what is it that even we're asking for? Review of what? Mm-hmm. In addition to the question of, what is the nature of the review? Is it binding? Is it advisory? But a review of what? And I don't know where I stand on that. I need to think about it, but I would also turn to you all if you have thoughts on that now. I'm happy to hear it. If not, then we can talk about it next time as well.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Very good point. Very good point. Establishing some sort of standard of threshold, because you raise an excellent point. I don't think there's any need for anyone at any one of these that standard application, whatever that means, for a review, just as we don't do it now. But perhaps it's going to be something that has an impact on a transition zone. Maybe, as Sabrina says, it's something to do with the number of units and size, et cetera. Very good points. I think that, Eldad, it's very, very helpful.
lot line changes, sorry, Sabrina.
No, I think that, this thought process is something that, I am striving to get incorporated through the FEIS is to create the thresholds, to understand, how many units we can expect, to understand, what is the size of units, trying to drill down on a more predictable future. Right now, we're very macro in the draft GEIS, and it's very macro. And I'm trying to get more down to the micro through the FEIS. And I think it's important for you folks to be aware of that, because right now it's too general. We really need to drill down a little bit more.
I agree.
So does,
I think LDAT's solution is or suggestions really puts us on the right track.
I completely agree. So it's going to cause some more thinking on that. So that's
right. And I can tell you, I'm listening. Felicia's listening. Between us, we can help you once you have more thought put into this. We can kind of structure some thought behind it too to help get what you're looking for across. But I think Eldad's question, advisory versus binding, thresholds, what type of projects, that's all essential to really helping restructure a role, and a role for the public.
So are we ready to take on another one? Anybody have anything else on this?
Oh, yeah.
What time are we running to?
I'm curious. I have Sabrina, do you have any idea as to how much solar energy might be generated with these taller buildings and putting stuff on the rooftops and everything like that?
I do know.
As long as we stay below 20 megawatts, then I think we don't have a real problem. But if somebody comes in at the end and says, oh, I can put up 22 megawatts of power, on all these roofs, and I'll do that as a separate horizontal project instead of a vertical project, then there's even less, there's a control issue that disappears. We don't get to control that at all. It's new, it's not quite in play yet, but it will be in a few months.
What about the notion, I think Eldad raised this before with sustainable building, and that we would look at green roofs, and how does that work? Doesn't seem like you have much, so much solar if you have green roofs, if that's going to be the standard.
Green roofs would be much better. That would be a way, that's a great idea. And that might be something that we put into, the code, that we, would expect that, that solar would be minimized, and green roofs would be, really thought of more highly or something like that.
So now we're on the subject of tall buildings. I'm just going to take that as a segue.
Leaping to tall buildings at a single
bound.
Your
cape? Where's your cape?
5 stories versus 4. And one of the things which just leapt right out at me was in the form-based code, it looks to me that almost every place in the code that allows, almost every, not every, that allows 5-story buildings is town-owned land. And that anybody who has private-owned land, they're limited to 4 stories. And, one could say, gee, that seems like self-dealing spot zoning for the town. If we really are truly interested in promoting development and not putting, that's A, number 1. B, not putting the town in an advantageous position relative to private developers, which essentially would take their share of the market away from them, right? It seems to me that everybody ought to be on an equal playing field, number 1. So in that case, it seems to me that I don't know whether it's a legal problem. It certainly could be a public policy problem, a political problem. To me, it's something that I know it's not intentional, right? It just sort of feels wrong to me. And as a consequence, I'd like to suggest that either everybody gets 5 stories or everybody can only go 4 stories. And I know which one I would choose. But in any event, it ought to be equal.
So let me just throw this out there, because as part of crafting the code and the decision of where 5-story is versus 4-story, and in some instances there are 3-story, it's not just town land, but clearly town land, the parking lots do have a predominance of 5 stories, but it
No, I understand. No, you don't, I'm sorry, you don't need to justify it
Okay.
from the planning point of view. I'm just saying that I don't think you can justify it. I don't think you can justify it from the public policy point of view. That's what I'm saying. And you may not be able to justify it from a legal point of view as somebody, and Nick maybe I'm sure doesn't want to necessarily render an opinion on this subject without having, the appropriate review and appropriate venue for that opinion.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
but nonetheless,
You're welcome up.
making the comment that
No,
it's I mean, self-dealing, right? I mean, that's one way it could be interpreted. I
Yeah.
know it wasn't intended that way, but intention doesn't matter in this particular case, right? If it's wrong, it's wrong. So I'd just like to make that comment that the town really ought to think very, very carefully about that.
Well, and I think there's another that now you got me on the segue that the height of the buildings has a potential to interfere with view sheds, and it has a potential, if you do it wrong, to make it look like a mess on a height. Even though the street level, the streetscape looks great, it's a mess relative to getting light to the right places, the view, and everything else. I mean, I could see people maybe 2 streets up on the hill with a 5-story building. Oh my God, I can't see anything. But then maybe it gets tapered, and when you get to the parking lots, it gets lower as you go down, as opposed to getting higher, particularly since I think the parking lot is built on a swamp, or at least in part, I should say. So there's to me a 3-dimensional view of view shed of this that really is, I don't know how to deal with.
So first, to Tom's point, I mean, if it's a legal issue, that obviously is critical, and it's not for us to determine. But I mean, if there's a legal issue there, then Nick, has that issue come up before? Has this been addressed in any way?
no, it's not. To my knowledge, it's not being raised before. I understand Tom's point. I'm not seeing the concern because the municipality is vested with broad discretion determining how it wants to apply zoning in its municipality. And so it has to be done for some discriminatory purpose or some purpose not permitted by law. And I'm not seeing that here. So I don't share that concern. Admittedly, I've just heard it for the first time because it's not being raised or brought to the attention before. So I'd have to give more consideration. But at first glance, I'm not having that concern.
Okay. I mean, so
from a legal standpoint.
Right. I mean, if that is an issue, obviously, I mean, we should know about it, but it sounds like it may not be an issue. From a planning and policy perspective, Sabrina was, I'm sure there was a lot of thinking from a planning perspective as to why these decisions were made. And Tom, you made the distinction that there's planning justification, but maybe not a public policy justification. I don't really understand the difference. To me, planning and public policy can often overlap. So, from my perspective, I don't have a problem with it if it's a good planning choice. And in fact, I think the public may prefer it because there's a lot of concern about height, and anything that happens on public land will likely get sort of a second bite at the apple, so to speak. And so it might be preferable. I don't know that from my perspective, I don't know if there's a need to sort of even it out for the sake of evening it out. But if we did, then I'd push it to 5, but that's neither here.
Right. This is not a big deal for me, right? I'm pointing out something which I think is an inequity. And I'm sure you understand as well as most people who are, in the professions we're in, that the middle stories of a building, that's where the meat is in the sandwich. that's where the income, that's where you really start to get a return on your investment, because the ground floor is really expensive. The top floor is expensive, not as expensive as the ground floor, but everything you can stick in between adds more percentage-wise prorated to your investment return, because it's the cheapest space you can get. And the difference between a 5-story building with 3 intermediate stories and a 4-story building with 2 intermediate stories, if you look at the numbers there, that's a big, big difference between the amount of return on investment to have that extra story in there. And so it's just a fact of, development. I mean, and we are concerned about whether, even at 4 stories, I think there's some concern. I mean, there in discussions that we've had about the development of private owned land, there are so many impediments to even start. Parcel, getting the parcels together, parking, all of these other impediments that are just built into the land there and the geometries of the town. And then to say, well, the town's building on a gray field. There is no better investment in terms of buying land and developing land than a gray field, because all of the, the environmental stuff with respect to green fields, and all those challenges, and brown fields has to be cleaned up. Gray fields are a gift, right? And the town already has the advantage in the marketplace of that, in addition to having the extra floor. And so in that sense, it just doesn't feel fair to me. And that's the public policy side of it, right?
Right.
Fairness.
I hear you. Okay.
The planning side of it, I understand, right? I'm just raising the question, the point that I think that there is this other issue that maybe at least ought to be talked about. That's all.
Well, I think one of the issues that you also raised, Tom, in connection with height was to what degree architectural bandaging is going to be successful in really camouflaging the mass that these buildings are going to present. Let's face it, it's going to be a monumental change in just the scale of the hamlet. These buildings are just inconsistent with the current scale, which is intentional, but it goes back to how much is enough. And I think I read somewhere in here, I raised the point, the difference between a 5-story and a 4-story build out, the yield was only 6 units different. And for that marginal difference, I don't know why the configuration was only 6, but for that very, very minor yield, it seems to me the costs in terms of impact, scale, potential impact to EMS, emergency services, fire department, ladders, size, garaging, all this kind of stuff, these things need to be looked at. And I don't think that the difference, the delta between 4 and 5 can be just flushed away and we ignore, well, it's best for the developer. What about the community here? So throughout this process, I know that there were some very inventive, very interesting architectural touches and finishes that are being used with the 5th floor, 4th floor would be built into the roof line itself and setbacks, and they might be successful. But I really think that it's going to be a very substantial change, and that just needs to be recognized. And I'm not so sure it's the best thing. I'm not quite sure what I'm saying on that, but it's just a recognition that the scale is going to be monumentally different. It becomes a town and not a hamlet.
In the summary chart, it says, Bob, and I did hear somewhere that the difference was 6 units, but in the chart in the EIS, it says that there's a difference of 963 for 4 stories and 997 for 5. So that's like 30.
Yep, 30.
30, 34.
Somewhere
like
in the text, I saw 6, and it jumped out at me. It seemed very strange.
Yeah.
Whatever the number is, the marginal utility of those extra units needs to be explored. And one of the other issues on these sides of these buildings is it's almost impossible to talk about it until we really flesh out the affordable housing issue, because that's going to drive up costs for these developers to meet that. Going to challenge them on their investment, so maybe they have to have 5 years to make this all work. And maybe that's the public policy that, on balance, is what works. I think that issue really has to be fleshed out more before you can discuss this intelligently.
Bob, your sound is messed up again.
Okay, sorry. Might be just me getting tired.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the whole building height and the proposed the form-based code, which is in the EIS, is the proposed alternative. It's to me, it would be instructive to really think about this whole thing and go back to the comp plan. And what was the mandate that the comp plan set? More multifamily housing, diversity of housing, A. B, it should be put in the hamlet, right? Check me where I'm wrong here. C, that we are looking for a more vibrant hamlet, and there are sort of sub-definitions to that, that we want a more walkable hamlet, right? And so if you put these things together, oh, there was some notions of a community center, some community facility, I think, in there also. So if the comp plan is the mandate for the town board to move forward, it seems to me that does not say that we need to build 1,000 units. I mean, there's no automatic conclusion from that to building 1,000 units, because the other thing that is also in the comprehensive plan is that everybody sort of likes the character of the town, right? People like the fact that it's, bucolic and all of that stuff. There are these other non-quantitative but qualitative mandates in the comp plan, which I think also apply. And so I think that one needs to pick apart, what the right size is to solve the comp plan mandate. The comp plan mandate, why isn't 300 units enough for housing, right? Why isn't 350 enough, or 500, 600? There's no rationale for the number other than that's how much we can put in here. And that's the developer's way of doing it. And that's what a developer would do. And I don't fault them for that. That's how we build cities. But there's another responsibility here. And so I'm concerned that we are pushing in the form-based code, we're pushing to whatever the maximum amount of development we can put in here is the form-based code. And I don't think that has been defined as really being in the public interest and necessarily meeting all the mandates of the comp plan. And as a consequence, I mean, one of the things that is really important to most people really didn't care about multifamily housing that much, right? What they really cared about is when they go into Chappaqua, they want to be something there. They want a there, and there's nothing there as far as they're concerned. They can go over to Pleasantville and go to Jacob Burns and have a meal. They can go to Peekskill and see some live entertainment. Terrytown, I mean, the comps are actually in the DGIS, and all those things are true. And so how do you get to there? And the receptacle for that, I think, has always been assumed to be the commercial retail space, right? That's where the shops come. That's where the restaurants come. That's the ground floor. That's where the lively environment will be. And it's always been there, right? If you look at the numbers in the various alternatives, I think the difference between where we are now and where we would be is in the form-based code recommendation is something like 30,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet, something like that. I forget, extra.
Of commercial, yeah, 20,800, I think, yeah.
Right now, there's 300,000 square feet, right? So 20,000 square feet is nothing.
Exactly.
And it's it's really, the 20,000 square feet isn't going to give you more retail to sort of transform it in size. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think it's better to have not enough retail and have competition for that space, which drives up the quality of the retailers, right? And makes it a more vibrant place with more people in a smaller area, rather than dispersing all your energy and you really don't have what you could have is something which is more compact. So, but that doesn't mean necessarily that because you put 900 units in here, that it's going to transform the retail completely. You want to have faith. We're not in the prediction business, right? You want to have faith that it will, but are you going to get that much more out of 900 units than 300 units? I mean, how much do you really need in order to do it? And the impact of 900 units versus 300 units is a big difference.
There's a big difference in impacts, but at the same token, and I go back to our committee hearings when we specifically asked the economic folks about this. Repeatedly, they said housing alone is not going to do it. You need to have people coming into the hamlet. You need visitors coming there. You need a reason to be there, whatever it might be, whether it's particular shops or otherwise. So in my view, as I alluded a couple of times in my comments, I think this is very top heavy, depending upon housing. Housing alone, housing is critically important. I absolutely support that. I think it's wonderful that we get these different kinds of options, but to do that to the exclusion and not to have the balance, and as I've suggested, introduce office space. Maybe at the train station, instead of housing, have office space. What you need is you need feet on the ground during the course of the business day. If you're just dealing with housing, people take off and they have to go work. If they're going to go into the city, they're going on the train to the city. They're not here. So they're going to be here on the weekends. It's not sufficient to give us the kind of vibrance that I think that we are really seeking here. So we need, I think, a better balance, not just on commercial that is retail, but commercial that is going to be office. Give a developer the option, if it makes market sense, to have office on second, third, fourth floors in a structure or two, if it makes sense. This is what you want. You want people here in the town during the course of the work week and work day. That's how you build up critical mass.
And this is one of the reasons why I think it's wrong to put the town land in this form-based code. Absolutely. As restrictive as the code is, because Absolutely. Not only do you make it more difficult for a developer to come in and do that, perhaps, but you also make it more difficult for the town to say, well, wait a minute, we don't have the building as defined in the form-based code. We don't have the building alternative to, well, actually, I think you do, but maybe I'm wrong. I think for a community civic facility, you can build pretty much anything you want, right? But I was thinking they need to be able to have the room to decide, well, what do we really need to do beyond the retail, which is not going to get us there.
Right.
And well, it might be commercial, it might be a swimming pool, it might be a skating rink, it might be a gymnasium. I don't know what it would be, but that's what the town on land should be for, is to figure that out and be able to put it in place.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
But in general, and Sabrina, correct me if I'm wrong, that's somewhat the beauty of the form-based code. I mean, the EIS measures, reasonable worst case scenario and makes assumptions as to, it has to make assumptions, right? Like we've said a couple of times, we can't predict the future, but it has to make assumptions as to what will actually happen within the parameters of the regulatory framework that is put forward. And the assumptions that are made are that it'll be mostly some ground floor retail where permitted, residential above, and some places, even where ground floor commercial is permitted, it would still likely be residential on the ground floor as well. That's some assumptions that are made, but that is not what is mandated, right? I mean, there's flexibility within this code for different uses depending on market forces. Is that fair to say?
Yes, except for the area that's a designated retail first floor.
Right, but if there was a demand for office that was not expected, some of these projected buildings that show retail on the ground floor and residential above could be office buildings for 3 or 4 or 5 stories. Is that true?
They would have to come back to a board because the code requires it to be retail.
No, but I'm saying office above, retail on the ground floor,
The office above, absolutely office
in
above.
place of residential.
Correct.
You can do that, Eldad. I'm just looking at the diagrams. It does say for floor-to-floor heights, which is really what we're talking about here, I think. Yeah, for floor-to-floor heights, 11.6 maximum, which should be enough to put an office in.
Mhm.
Just
Right.
enough to put an office in.
So, getting back to the discussion of, COVID and what impacts, what permanent impacts they may have on commute and use and driving and work from home and, a decentralization of office space, all that stuff. I mean, there is a certain beauty to the form-based code as opposed to Euclidean zoning that allows some flexibility, that builds flexibility into the code. And so, I think that's a great thing here as well. Tom, your point about the comp plan and the public engagement sessions from 2014 and 2017 being vague and general and not putting quantitative figures in place is absolutely right. But that's what these things do, right? I mean, people say, I want a vibrant hamlet and I want a diversity of housing and I want a resilient economy and all that stuff. And those are easy things for everyone to agree on, right? And so, and that's what happens in these kinds of sessions. And it didn't say 1,000 units and it didn't say 300 units, but it also didn't say 2,000 units or 5,000 units. You implied that it's 1,000 units because that's the max that could fit here. And I wonder, is that true? I mean, why were 3, 4, and 5 stories chosen? Is that the max that theoretically could be handled without too many traffic implications or school implications?
Let me
Sabrina?
tell you, I'm sorry. Let me tell you where I think the 5 stories came from. But first of all, going back to the comp plan, I understand the comp plan is a broad policy document.
Yeah, I know you do.
It's just what we wish it could be. And so as we get closer and closer, things get tighter and tighter. You start to define things and things that either you can achieve or you can't achieve, right? Because life takes over. The 5-story came because at some point in time, somebody in the previous administration had been in conversations with other people in the development world, and there was I think a broad consensus among a certain group of people that 5 stories was a minimum that would work to pay for a parking garage, and a parking garage for the town, right? In order to free up the land, you have to build a parking garage to park the commuters, and so there were conversations that were very informal, but were very informative at the same time. And I think that that carried into the 5 stories is when the what's it called? The scoping document was done. 5 stories was set as the upper limit. And then the other was 3 and 4, I think it was, I forget. But 5 stories was set as the upper limit. And there were people in those conversations when it got to doing the scoping and the working sessions some people said 5 is too much, but 5 stories got in there. And so that's why it's in there. It's not based on, I mean, that's what it's based on. Could it be 10? Yeah, but nobody would propose 10 because that's just not going to go anywhere. Right. So it was 5, it was set to that. And I think that then is how much can you build in 5 stories on this piece of property? And that's how you get the numbers that you get.
And my recollection is consistent with Tom's of those conversations, even at our committee meetings, in that there were actually conversations and people suggesting maybe 8 stories, may not, 7 stories, or 9 or 10 actually might work. But it just was rejected out of hand. But it was really driven by those folks on the committee who were really in the building and development side, who said 5 stories is really the right number for us. It's the right number for us to, make, be assured that we'll have the correct return. So that's really where the 5 story came from, as far as I recall. in those conversations, and it was pushed back in terms of the height and the hillsides and this sort of thing. But I think that's really where we came from. There was concern that, of course, if you design something or you set up a code that's not going to work for developers, then we're just wasting our time anyway. So the input was actually very useful, but I think that's where it really was coming from.
I'm going to have to say something here that might be in conflict with your recollection. Whereas there might have been thoughts by, previous town board members in speaking with the development community of what should happen on town land, the 4 or 5 story discussion was rooted in the market scan, in the sense that the market scan indicated that at 3 stories, or current code now, at 35 feet, 2 and 3 stories was not feasible. There was, things weren't happening now, and that there were some real economic reasons why that wasn't happening. There was no tolerance for higher than 5 stories. And, the 5 stories, so 4 stories was the starting point. All right. And that was really the point of, could you tolerate 4 stories? There was then an examination of topography, existing buildings, planned buildings, and then looking at the whole idea of creating a center, looking at that train station as the center, expanding the park, talking about green space, places for people to gather, and then looking at the character of the existing community. And that's where we had a higher kind of expectation for more stories, or tolerated, I should say,
Tolerance, yeah. That's
tolerate more stories at the train station, which was under another level of control and for a foreseeable future process to really vet that. But then taking off of the bridge of allowing, the 5 or 6 property owners on either side of that bridge to build to 5 stories, but the rest is 3 and 4 stories, in fact, because of that market scan.
So
came up with the economics.
Yeah, I don't know what market scan you're referring to, but I mean, I was just over in Pleasantville next to Bob's office. Actually, I was looking at his window to be sure he was taking care of my insurance for me. But right next door is a development it's 3 stories, isn't it, Bob?
Yes. Yeah.
A residential development, 3 stories, structured parking, and I guess I should believe a market scan or my lying eyes. I don't know what I should believe at this point, because there are developments that go forward at lower densities and lower heights all the time around here, and they just do.
Right. And so Tom, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to add this particular issue in the code right now. It needs to be explored further, because I agree with in listening to public comment, in listening to what I know to be true, what this board has experienced with come into my office, I think we need to dig deeper in that economic analysis to really determine, can we maintain a 3-story new height measurement, right? Because we're changing the definition of height in the form-based code from the way we measure height today. And so that's an area I wholeheartedly believe to be needing more analysis. My words are not flowing the way I want them to flow.
Oh, I know, we're all tired and it's late.
Right, but that particular point is one of my main comments right now, because I understand what the character balancing issue needs to be, and I'm trying to get the code there.
So I just want to be clear here that I'm not preferring 3 stories to 4 stories to 5 stories. I mean, I'm really not. I'm just looking for a justification for those decisions that doesn't appear to be rational yet, right? And I do believe that it's entirely proper to test the boundaries, right? Go over the line and test that, because maybe, 5 stories instead of 4, let's try 5 stories and just see what that means. And then we'll know that that's too much, or we'll know that that's right.
Well, and that's also
in any design process, what you want to do is you want to sort of go beyond the boundaries of the page and figure out, if you're missing something. And that's why I think at least going to 5 stories is the right thing to do from a study perspective, right? And if it yields better information to a decision, a very important decision, then thank goodness that we did that, right? I happen to think that the decision is going to end up more to 4 stories, but because I think that 5 is just not supportable. But that's the spirit in which I'm making this comment.
Yeah, no, I think they're good comments.
I'm really heartened to hear that, Sabrina, that the economics really needs to be looked at much more deeply, and we have to get into those weeds. And again, I go back to one of the issues that in terms of alternative, I think I suggested alternative D or E, whatever the letter we're up to, and that was for some sort of generic public use of public property. And we can throw out different ideas, and every single one of those different ideas, whether it's supportable or whether people want to do it or not, is town driven. So I go back to this sense of community. This is a town asset. It's not just a Chappaqua hamlet. What we need to be doing is developing something in this town with housing, but at the same token, a reason for people to be there, that's there, as Tom said, the destination. And I think if you do an economic analysis with a real there in the as a destination, I think the numbers are very, very different. I think the resolution of that equation is very different than just saying we're going to have 900 units or 600 units or 300 units of housing. Again, I keep going back to what we were told during the committee meetings. You need something other than just housing. And right now, I see this as the form-based code is leading in that way. And again, whether it's a world-class art center, whether it's a performing arts center, whether it's a pool, a community center, whatever you want to call it, something that is down on that public property that serves the public need for the entire town, becomes a destination for the entire town, will skew these numbers to a very large extent. And whether it's 3 stories, 4 stories, or 5 stories, it almost becomes irrelevant from the economic standpoint.
Can I, 2 things. One, I think we all agree with Sabrina that the EIS requires additional review of the economic analysis of development thresholds, and I think we've made those comments, and I hope those will come out, right? I think we're all on the same page there. And then I just want to say for the record that a lot of people talk about additional height or density as inherently a bad thing, as sort of it's something to be traded off for, and I don't necessarily view it that way, and so I just want to say that we don't, from my perspective, 5 stories isn't inherently bad and something that we should, a pill to swallow in order to get something else, whatever that may be. And so it's just a question of, does it make sense here and can we handle it? But it is not, from my perspective, inherently a bad thing. It doesn't mean that, again, from my perspective, that any density is okay. Obviously, that's not the case, right? There's a reason that 10 stories wasn't studied because, and likely was dismissed out of hand. But inherently, there's nothing wrong, again, from my perspective, with density or height.
So the phrase that you put in there is one I completely agree with, was 5 stories in order to get something else. And it's the getting something else that 4 stories doesn't already get you, or 3 stories doesn't already get you, or not, it's not yet been confirmed that you need to go to 5 stories to get to something else. And we're not even sure what something else is really, other than, as far as I can tell, walkability and more vibrant. I mean, these are the qualitative things that are really hard to measure. So I think it'd be a stretch to say, well, you get a more walkable hamlet with 5 stories as opposed to 4 stories. I think you could probably reasonably challenge that statement. So again, I agree with you. 5 stories, I think, would be acceptable if it gets you enough of the something else, right, to make it worthwhile. And I just don't think that we have a good understanding of that yet.
I concur with that. Those are good comments from both of you guys. Thank you.
So
What are the next steps?
I'd like to propose that, I know it's, what time is it?
8:30.
It's almost 9.
Yeah, 10 to 9.
Bob, you remember the days when we used to go to 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning back in the 90s with all those applications? This is nothing.
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact.
I think I'm aging in place here. I can't take it anymore.
I know,
Yeah.
but we're older, so we're usually in bed by 8 o'clock, so this is tough.
Yeah, with coronavirus, we insist that you get good sleep so that you're healthy.
So anyway, do we have enough, Sabrina, through this conversation that we can?
We can do what we did last time.
Together?
What we could do what we did last time and kind of pull together a draft kind of bullet sense, not a formal memo or anything, but at least get you something to react to or add to. And, you know, kind of reiterating what we've talked about the code tonight. You know, and I can do some checking too on some of the points that you raised to try and correct the record if it needs to be corrected.
Right.
And then we'll get that back to you so that you can further edit it. I do think you should set another special meeting to discuss this.
Yep, in the memos.
Yeah, the memos. So we will be working on a more formalized memo on the DGEIS. We will give a draft kind of takeaway on your comments on the form-based code to be further discussed and revised thereafter.
Is there anything else that someone wants to speak to on the form-based code that we haven't covered yet?
I'm sorry, Bob, what was that?
Is there anything else that we need to speak about the form-based code at this point before we shut down for the night?
Well, yeah, but I mean, there are a few things, but excuse me. I don't know whether we want to take them up now.
Well, if you think we can take them up in the next few minutes, I think it would be better to have this available for Felicia and Sabrina so we can get you know, a better memo with more points, all of the points that we think we need to discuss.
Okay, so I have a comment. This goes back to the town-owned land. There was a leap that the consultant took in the town-owned land. They went from taking existing parcels, right, as they did in the private owned land, and setting, based on the property line, setting what the setback lines would be and the build-to lines and, you know, all of those things based on the property lines. But in the town-owned land, all of a sudden they made a master planning decision to say, well, we're going to make Memorial Park bigger, and we're going to change those parcel lines and make those parcels smaller. And it was such a, they made it quite a bit bigger, and they used the justification that it'd be more gathering space for people and open space and green space and all of those things, which sound good, but they aren't necessarily the right thing to do. There's a basic principle, and books have been written about this, and Eldad probably knows them well, that you need to size open spaces very carefully. And actually, it's better than an open space, especially in urban environments. We're not talking about recreation space, we're talking about urban space. It's actually better to err on the side of being too small than too big. And I'm just not sure what it is that prompts one to say that that space needs to be bigger in such a small town, number one, and what activities are actually programmed for it that would justify that space being that big. And if we're going to be changing parcel lines and build-to lines, why is it a semicircle? That's number one. Number two, I mean, it's a sort of a fatuous thing to me, you know, just to make this up and say, oh, isn't that great? No, this is a matter of serious master planning. I mean, it's a serious business to do this right and to think about it carefully. The other thing about it is that I don't understand if we have a problem, or we think we have a problem with the vitality of our main streets, being Greeley and King, and in particular, we're talking about Greeley. It seems to me the last thing you want to do is to make an open space which is separated from Greeley Street. Call that the new town square and put new retail around it. So you have to go through a gateway, and on the other side of the gateway, you have this big semicircle and, you know, a railroad track on the other side. It's to me, it's nuts. If you're going to do anything, you want to flip that thing and have the open space on Greeley Street and have the retail on that. And your town square should be on Greeley Street instead of this enclave that you have to go find. And it's to me, that's one of the things that I really disagree with the master planning with the form-based code process, is it got into master planning and decided that, oh, we're going to have a civic center. Or we already have a town hall over here, we have a library over here, and now we're going to put a community center over here. We're going to call it the civic center. I'm sorry, but a town this small is having this much trouble with saying it's having this much trouble with its main streets. What you want to do is you want to integrate those uses on the main street, not separate them. Places where you have civic centers are like San Francisco, right? Or Manhattan, or big cities where you accumulate buildings. But if you have the concerns we have, you want to take these are like leverage opportunities to take these uses and put them where they are going to attract people who are coming in town not to shop or not to dine, but will shop and will dine because they are going to, you know, the community center, or, you know, the swimming pool, or whatever it is, that unknown thing that we keep talking about that could be done. So I have a problem with the form-based code in that it makes a leap into master planning by setting these rigid lines and saying this is what the new town is going to look like, without the proper process of proper planning. And I know it's a very big subject, but the town, when it comes time for the town to do this, if they are going to do it, to develop this piece of property, they are going to go through a master planning process. They're going to have to figure out with the developer what to do where, and they're going to be in a process in front of the public, and they're going to be in a process where all these things are going to be discussed and considered, and should be, and done, I think, properly with proper planning. And it was not properly planned by this consultant, and in my opinion. And I mean, I've had a career doing this kind of thing, so my opinion should count a little bit here. And if they're going to go through that process anyway, again, it begs the question, why is the town-owned property in the form-based code to begin with?
Good point.
So that's about all I've got left right now, but you asked for it, so there it is.
Okay. Sabrina, I had a question for you. On the, who owns the property adjacent to the T intersection with Greeley and Quaker? You know, the ramps that go up? Is that state-owned? Is that county-owned road, state-owned road? Who owns the property between, say, the buildings on either side and the roadway?
The triangle is owned by the state and the county.
The interior triangle, or even?
Yes, the interior triangle. There's private property adjacent to the bridge, you know, like there's kind of a public-private line on either side of the bridge coming down onto Greeley. But that's a state and county roadway. That kind of intersection in there is county and state. There have been discussions about the county giving us portions of that roadway. I don't know if that transaction has been fully vetted yet.
Well, again, it goes back to the, you know, it gets to be master planning again, but outside of the code. But that would really make this whole project, the whole development of town, so much more palatable and so much stronger if we had a T intersection and those lands that are on either side of those ramps, either way.
My understanding is that the slope on a T intersection for trucks was too great.
I understand.
Which is why we discussed this last time, why the town explored the modified roundabout, so on and so on.
Yep. No, I've been around a few of those applications. So yeah.
Well, we're not going to change that. The time to change that would have been when the bridge was built. And I think that this was talked about, right? And nobody listened.
Yep.
The state said no.
Sorry.
So they listened.
They listened, they said no.
Well, before
That's
the
how
last
they
time we
listen.
got it, they actually said yes. So it was a different time.
Yeah, well, again, you know, and we can ask again.
Yep.
Different circumstances.
Exactly. Yep, I agree.
I once had this meeting. This is funny. I had once had this meeting. This is like a while ago, obviously, with Trent Lott, and it was on the subject of trying to get the House and the Senate to work together on a master plan for the Capitol, because I had the job of master planning. And he sat there. He was head of appropriations or something at the time, and he sat there with the biggest smile on his face and nodding, and with like dead fish eyes, right? And he was agreeing to everything I said, but he was listening to nothing I said. That's the state.
and he was a politician, right? You expect something different?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
How naive.
Great. Anyone else, anything they want to add, or should we call it a night? And
Call it a night.
All right.
Let's do.
Thank you, Felicia and Sabrina. Thank you very much for your efforts on this.
Date, folks.
What's that?
Another
Set a
Date for the next.
A date.
Wait, you gonna do this again?
Yes.
We had so much fun.
We're never going to stop.
I think you
This
just
was
want
not
me to
just
keep
a
coming.
two-step.
So we have a meeting on Tuesday, right? A regular meeting?
Yes.
Yep, 17th.
Is the agenda full?
It is Chapel Crossing, and I would rather separate this discussion from that. The attorneys are different.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Should we try to meet before Thanksgiving on maybe Tuesday the 24th or Wednesday the 25th? If people are around. If not, do we do it after Thanksgiving?
You guys have plenty of time to meet.
Right.
I would like to request that it be after Thanksgiving so that we have time to prepare what you need.
Yeah.
Mainly-
Is the town board's public hearing is still continued?
Yes, the public hearing is continued to December 8th.
That's tight.
So let me
Well,
ask
it's 30 days after.
Well,
the
but-
comments.
Yeah,
you're talking about-
at least 30 days after.
Nick, can I get some clarification? Is the discussion of the form-based code on a different track than the DGIS?
No.
Exactly. Thank you, Tom. That's where I was going to go. That you want to make sure you get your comments on the DGEIS in, but the public hearing on the form-based code will likely be closed, but they're going to continue to have discussions on the form-based code, likely introduce a revised version, and there will be subsequent hearings on the form-based code. So you still have time to comment on the form-based code. That's on a much different time track.
Good, because I think our response needs to be especially, I mean, they all always need to be thoughtful, but especially thoughtful on the form-based code. I think that we, I think we're getting there, but it might take a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you want to meet on
So we have
December 3rd, keeping it on Thursdays?
Okay.
all right.
Does that work?
I was thinking of December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, but okay, the 3rd's all right.
Okay. Nick, does that work for you?
Which date?
December 3rd, Thursday?
It does, yes. I was also going to suggest you may want to give some consideration to breaking your comments down into groups so that it's more manageable. It would also allow you to release some of your comments sooner than others. You have some comments on process, you may have some on architectural guidelines, and you may have some on zoning density. So if you think of it in different buckets, maybe that would allow you to get through it easier, and also so that the town board then can receive the comments in more manageable and segmented reviews. Just a thought.
I think that's a good idea.
Except using.
That's twice Tom said that about me.
Except the use of segment.
You get one more, then you're done.
Okay. Good idea. So, whatever Felicia and Sabrina can do within their time constraints. I mean, they have a job also in addition to our comments and lots of stuff going on. So, whatever they can
You'll
do.
definitively kind of shape up your DGEIS memo, and we can try and categorize that as well, Nick. And then we can, we'll put together the rough draft similar to what we did with the,
Let's go.
with the code.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't want to wait until December to finish the DGIS memo. We can do that sooner, right?
Yeah, we're gonna work on that and get that to you, soon.
Well,
Soon.
we probably will want to meet on that to go through it all, it seems to me, rather than just doing it through emails where people give, their red line and someone doesn't like that red line and we go through this chasing our tails on red
Yeah,
line.
I think you'll have time on when we meet again. And, as Nick said, the form-based code is bound to change and there'll be more time to comment on aspects of the code. So, you could submit earlier comments on the form-based code and wait to submit more comments. But I think you're going to need an opportunity to discuss the draft that we're preparing for you for the DG. So.
Okay.
You have some earlier meetings too, like in December. When is your meeting in December? Hang on.
December 1 and December 15.
We can see how long it will take us to get it to you for discussion at your December 1 meeting.
Sure.
We'll try our best. If we feel we can get a draft scheduled for your review at that meeting, we'll put it on that meeting.
That's for the code.
No, that's for the DGEIS.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
So it's 6:30 on December 3rd?
Yeah. Is that good?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Is there a
We just
motion?
need your motion
adjourn the
to-
meeting?
I'll move.
Second? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.
Aye, bye.
All right. We'll see you Tuesday.
Stopping the
Take care.
movie.